6-year-old Mason Thompson was playing near the retention pond behind his grandmother's house in the Florida Everglades when the 14-foot American alligator emerged from the murky water, its massive jaws and predatory instincts immediately identifying the small boy as easy prey in the humid wilderness that had claimed countless victims over centuries. The child had been chasing fireflies in the early evening twilight, completely unaware that he had wandered into the hunting territory of one of North America's most efficient aquatic predators during feeding time. "Grandma, help me!" Mason screamed as the enormous alligator began its calculated approach across the marshy ground, moving with the patient, deadly precision of an apex predator that had identified helpless prey far from any possible assistance. That's when the rumble echoed across the swampland. 10 members of the Everglades Brotherhood MC were returning from a charity ride for wildlife conservation when Club President Marcus Steele Rodriguez heard something that made every protective instinct in his combat-trained mind explode into action. The unmistakable sound of a child's terror piercing through the Florida wilderness that should have been empty of human presence. These battle-hardened warriors were about to face the most dangerous reptile rescue in American motorcycle club history, proving that real courage means charging toward prehistoric predators when innocent life hangs in the balance. Would you like to join us for this incredible journey? Subscribe to our channel now so you don't miss what happens next. The Everglades Brotherhood Motorcycle Club had been riding the highways and backroads of South Florida for over 15 years, their membership consisting entirely of military veterans and emergency responders who had found brotherhood and purpose through their commitment to protecting those who ventured into the unforgiving terrain of America's most dangerous wetland ecosystem. What had started as weekend rides among former Marines had evolved into the most respected swamp rescue organization in the Southeast. Marcus Steele Rodriguez, the 48-year-old former Navy SEAL commander who led the Brotherhood, was concluding their monthly charity ride to raise funds for Everglades conservation when his combat-honed hearing detected something that made every alarm in his tactical awareness system detonate simultaneously. The combination of a child's desperate scream and the distinctive sounds of large reptile movement through wetland terrain was unmistakable to someone who had served in regions where such combinations meant immediate life-or-death crisis. "All units, code red emergency," Steele commanded through his helmet radio to the 9 riders behind him. "Child in mortal danger, large predator confirmed, immediate intervention required." "This is real-world combat, brothers. Someone's about to die if we don't move right now." The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. 10 motorcycles began converging on Steele's coordinates with military precision, their engines creating a mechanical thunder that announced the arrival of men who had spent their careers facing impossible odds in hostile environments, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Captain Derek Gator Williams, a former Marine Force recon specialist who served as the Brotherhood's reptile tactical coordinator, was first to establish visual contact with what would become the most dangerous alligator encounter in their organization's history. "Visual confirmed," he radioed with controlled intensity. 6-year-old male, approximately 30 yards from mature American alligator. Gator is in hunting mode, showing aggressive predatory behavior. Through his military-grade tactical scope, Gator could see Mason Thompson frozen in absolute terror as the massive alligator approached with the patient, calculated movements of a predator that had identified easy prey in its territorial domain. The child's bright red T-shirt made him clearly visible against the green swamp backdrop, but his complete paralysis was the only thing preventing the gator from triggering its explosive charge sequence immediately. "Holy shit," whispered Master Sergeant Rick Doc Patterson, a former Army Special Forces medic whose swamp medicine training had included extensive experience with alligator attacks. "That's a mature bull gator, probably 14 feet minimum. One bite will kill that kid instantly, and there's nowhere for him to run in that marsh." Steele felt his SEAL training engage as he processed the tactical nightmare they were confronting. A child trapped by a 14-foot alligator in Florida swampland represented the kind of impossible rescue scenario that required perfect coordination, instantaneous decision-making, and the willingness to sacrifice everything to protect innocent life against overwhelming natural force. All units, immediate predator intervention protocol, Steele ordered, his Navy training automatically shifting him into combat command mode. Priority 1 is child extraction under hostile conditions. Priority 2 is gator distraction and deterrence. We're going into the swamp against a superior predator, and we're bringing that boy home alive. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you're listening to in the comments. The 10 Everglades Brotherhood members who responded to Mason Thompson's crisis represented some of the most specialized and dangerous training available to American military forces. Former Navy SEALs, Marine Force recon specialists, Army Rangers, Green Berets, and swamp warfare experts, all united by their commitment to protecting innocent life regardless of personal risk or impossible odds. The tactical situation they faced was unprecedented in civilian emergency response. The alligator that was stalking Mason represented one of nature's most perfect killing machines, capable of explosive bursts of speed, bone-crushing bite force of over 3,000 pounds per square inch, and the ability to drag prey underwater where resistance was impossible. Staff Sergeant Tony Scout Rodriguez, a former Army Ranger whose reconnaissance training had kept him alive through multiple tours in similar wetland environments, was conducting rapid tactical assessment of terrain, water depth, escape routes, and intervention possibilities. Terrain analysis shows limited approach options, he reported. Gator has positioned itself between the child and solid ground. Standard wildlife deterrence may not be effective with an actively hunting predator in its own territory. The alligator's behavior indicated that this was not a territorial defense or chance encounter, but active predation. The gator had identified Mason as prey and was conducting the kind of patient stalking that preceded a killing strike. Every second of delay increased the probability that the predator would commit to its explosive attack. Steele dismounted his Harley 40 yards from where Mason stood frozen, his SEAL training automatically calculating attack vectors, water entry points, and extraction possibilities. The alligator had not yet triggered its final strike sequence, but reptilian predation patterns indicated that commitment to attack could occur within seconds once optimal positioning was achieved. "Doc, emergency medical protocol for alligator attack?" Steele asked through tactical communications, understanding that gator attacks typically resulted in massive trauma requiring immediate advanced swamp medicine. "Massive tissue damage, crushing injuries to torso and limbs, potential drowning if dragged underwater," Doc replied with clinical precision born from treating similar injuries in military operations. "If that gator connects, the child will require immediate trauma surgery that we can't provide in swamp conditions. We have maybe 60 seconds before predation behavior shifts to active strike." Sergeant First Class Mike "Thunder" Martinez, a former Marine whose explosive ordnance disposal training had taught him to remain calm under extreme pressure, was positioning himself for what would become the most dangerous flanking maneuver through alligator habitat he had ever attempted. "Steele, I can create distraction from the Western Marsh approach, but if that gator charges me instead of retreating, I'm probably dead." "Negative, Thunder," Steele replied immediately. "We coordinate as a unit or not at all. No one faces that prehistoric bastard alone. Tell me, have you ever saved someone?" Steele asked himself as he prepared for the most dangerous rescue of his career, knowing that failure meant watching a child die in one of the most horrific ways imaginable. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? The intervention strategy that followed would be studied by herpetologists and military tacticians for years to come. Steele's SEAL training had taught him that large reptilian predators responded to displays of overwhelming force, coordinated threats, and environmental disruption that made them recalculate the cost-benefit ratio of their intended attack. "All units, maximum acoustic and visual assault," Steele commanded as he began moving toward the alligator and Mason. "Full engine power, synchronized intimidation, make ourselves appear to be a larger threat than the boy represents as prey." 10 Harley-Davidson motorcycles began executing a tactical maneuver that had never been attempted in swamp conditions, using synchronized engine noise and coordinated movement as psychological weapons to overwhelm an alligator's sensory system and force recalculation of attack priorities. The mechanical thunder created by 10 high-performance engines operating at maximum capacity in the Florida wetlands was unlike anything the alligator had encountered during its decades in the Everglades. The sound reverberated across the water and created acoustic pressure that triggered every evolutionary instinct, telling the gator that unknown threats might be more dangerous than the small prey it had been stalking. Corporal James Phoenix Martinez, a former Air Force pararescue specialist whose training included reptile behavior under extreme stress, was monitoring the alligator's responses to their acoustic intervention. "Gator showing confusion and defensive posturing," he reported. "Acoustic assault is creating hesitation, but predator focus remains locked on the child. We need immediate secondary intervention before it commits to strike." The breakthrough came when Steele made a decision that violated every rule of safe alligator interaction, but represented exactly the kind of calculated extreme risk that SEAL training had prepared him for throughout his military career. He dismounted his motorcycle and began walking directly toward the alligator, using his own body as bait to draw the gator's attention away from Mason. "Steele, what the hell are you doing?" Gator demanded through radio communications, his voice carrying the controlled panic of a Marine who recognized suicidal tactics. "Making myself a bigger target than Mason represents as prey," Steele replied, with supernatural calm, as he approached the alligator using confident but non-threatening body language. "If that gator's going to kill someone today, better it's me than him." The moment when Steele positioned himself between the 14-foot alligator and 6-year-old Mason was witnessed by 9 combat veterans who understood exactly what their commander was risking. A mature bull gator could kill a grown man in seconds, but Steele's intervention had created the tactical opening they needed for child extraction under combat conditions. "Doc, child extraction now," Steele commanded without breaking eye contact with the alligator, which was now focused on the adult male who had entered its territory, rather than the small prey that no longer appeared to be the most immediate concern. Doc Patterson moved toward Mason with the careful precision that 26 years of combat medicine had taught him, approaching the paralyzed child from an angle that kept Steele's body between Mason and the gator. "Son, I'm going to pick you up and get you out of here," he said, in the calm voice he had used with wounded civilians in combat zones around the world. Mason's response was remarkable. For a 6-year-old facing prehistoric terror, instead of panicking or attempting to run, he followed Doc's instructions with the trust that children instinctively give to adults who project competence and protection under extreme pressure. His cooperation would prove crucial for the successful extraction that followed. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. The child extraction phase of the rescue required Steele to maintain his position as primary target, while Doc carried Mason to safety behind the protective barrier of 9 motorcycles whose riders were prepared to engage the alligator if it decided to attack their commander. "Package secured," Doc announced as he reached the protective perimeter with Mason in his arms. "Child is unharmed, showing severe shock but no physical injuries." "Steele, get the hell out of there now," Gator commanded, as the alligator began showing increased agitation at the number of humans who had entered its territorial space. But Steele's withdrawal from his position between the alligator and Mason required the kind of tactical patience that SEAL training had taught him to maintain, even under overwhelming pressure. Moving too quickly could trigger the gator's explosive charge reflex, while remaining too long increased the probability that territorial aggression would override predatory caution. The successful completion of Steele's withdrawal was achieved through coordinated distraction, created by Scout Rodriguez, who used his motorcycle to generate movement and noise patterns that drew the alligator's attention away from Steele's position while providing acoustic cover for his retreat to safety. "All units clear. Predator deterred," Steele announced as he reached the protective formation. "Mission accomplished, 0 casualties, child secured." But the rescue operation was far from complete. The alligator remained in an area frequented by children, fishermen, and families who could encounter the same predator that had nearly killed Mason. The Everglades Brotherhood had saved one child, but they now faced the responsibility of ensuring that no one else would be threatened by the same gator. Staff Sergeant Danny Ranger Davis, a former Florida Fish and Wildlife officer whose swamp enforcement training included coordination with reptile management agencies, was already establishing communication with Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission officers who would be responsible for managing the alligator encounter. FWC ETA 30 minutes. Reptile Management Team ETA 45 minutes, Ranger reported. "We need to maintain area security and provide witness testimony for the predation incident report until professional teams arrive." The area security mission required the Brotherhood to establish a perimeter that would prevent other civilians from entering the zone where the alligator remained, while also providing detailed documentation of the predatory behavior they had witnessed and interrupted. Mason Thompson's grandmother, Patricia Thompson, arrived at the rescue site 25 minutes after the incident, having been contacted by emergency services who had been coordinated with by the Brotherhood through 911 dispatch systems. Her relief at finding her grandson alive and unharmed was overwhelming, but it was accompanied by the terrifying realization of how close she had come to losing Mason to one of the most horrific deaths imaginable in Florida's dangerous ecosystem. "How can we ever thank you?" Patricia asked Steele as she held Mason tightly, her voice shaking with emotions that ranged from gratitude to residual terror. "You saved my baby's life." "Ma'am, protecting children is our mission," Steele replied with quiet dignity. "Mason's safe now, and that's what matters. Tell me, have you ever saved someone?" Patricia Thompson asked Steele, her voice filled with awe at the courage these strangers had shown for her grandson. "If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep?" The professional wildlife management response that followed was coordinated by Dr. Patricia Chen, an alligator specialist who had been called in specifically to assess the predation incident and determine appropriate management actions for a gator that had demonstrated active hunting behavior toward humans. This alligator exhibited clear predatory stalking behavior rather than defensive territorial response, Dr. Chen reported as the wildlife team prepared their capture equipment. The gator identified the child as prey and was conducting systematic predation. Without the biker's intervention, this would have resulted in a fatal attack. The assessment process required detailed documentation of the incident, examination of the scene for evidence of alligator behavior patterns, and evaluation of the gator's current condition and threat level to determine appropriate management actions. During the wildlife management operation, the Brotherhood maintained protective security while also providing detailed testimony about the incident that would be crucial for determining how to prevent similar encounters in the future. Mason's medical evaluation revealed no physical injuries, but documented severe psychological trauma that would require specialized counseling designed for children who had survived predator encounters. The experience of facing a 14-foot alligator had created the kind of terror that could affect his development unless properly addressed. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the child psychologist who specialized in Florida wildlife trauma, was impressed by Mason's resilience and his positive response to the men who had saved his life. Mason shows remarkable emotional stability considering what he experienced, Dr. Martinez observed. His trust in the Brotherhood suggests that he understands they represent safety and protection. The investigation into how Mason had become isolated near the retention pond revealed gaps in family supervision and property safety that were common among Florida residents who underestimated the dangers of living near alligator habitat. This incident could have been prevented through better family awareness of alligator behavior and improved property security near water features, explained Wildlife Officer Michael Thompson during the incident briefing. The Brotherhood's rescue highlights the need for enhanced public education about living safely in alligator territory. But for the Everglades Brotherhood, prevention education was secondary to the knowledge that they had saved a child's life and demonstrated that military training could be effectively applied to civilian emergencies that exceeded the capabilities of traditional rescue services. The alligator was ultimately relocated to a more remote area of the Everglades, where human contact would be minimal, avoiding the necessity of destroying an animal that had been following natural predatory instincts in habitat that had been invaded by human development. 10 months after his rescue from the 14-foot alligator, 6-year-old Mason Thompson had transformed from a traumatized child into a confident young Florida native who had found an extended family of 10 protective uncles who had shown him that courage meant facing prehistoric predators to protect others. The Everglades Brotherhood had not only saved his life, they had taught him that strength came from understanding nature's dangers while respecting the wilderness that made Florida unique. Steele Rodriguez sat in Mason's family living room in Homestead, reviewing the latest wetland safety education reports while the sound of motorcycles arriving for their monthly family gathering echoed from the suburban neighborhood that bordered the vast Everglades ecosystem. The modest house had been upgraded with advanced perimeter security and emergency communication systems, but more importantly, it had become the emotional headquarters of an organization that now understood their mission included education and prevention that could save lives before emergencies occurred. The new alligator safety protocols are working, Steele reported to Mason's grandmother Patricia as he studied the latest incident statistics from Miami-Dade County. Gator-human encounters near residential areas are down 45% since we implemented the education programs, and property owner compliance with safety guidelines has improved dramatically. Mason smiled as he watched Brotherhood members setting up tables for their monthly strategy meeting, each of them veterans who had become his mentors, teachers, and the family that had taught him what real courage looked like. His relationship with each Brotherhood member was unique. Steele taught him leadership and tactical thinking. Gator shared swamp survival skills. Doc provided first aid training adapted for children. The relationship between Mason and the Brotherhood had evolved far beyond the dramatic rescue that had brought them together. The young boy had become the inspiration for their expanded mission that now included wetland education, family safety training, and youth development programs that taught children practical survival skills while building character and environmental awareness. "Tell me about the Mason Thompson Everglades Safety Foundation," his grandmother Patricia requested, noting the detailed program materials spread across Steele's briefcase related to the non-profit organization that had been established to prevent other children from facing the danger Mason had survived. "We're now operating wetland safety education programs throughout South Florida, teaching families how to live safely near alligator habitat while developing emergency response capabilities that can save lives when prevention isn't enough," Steele explained with enthusiasm. Mason's experience showed us that children can survive impossible situations when they have proper education and when adults are prepared to risk everything to protect them. The Mason-Thompson Everglades Safety Foundation represented something unprecedented in Florida environmental education, military veterans using their combat training and wilderness expertise to teach families practical coexistence skills with dangerous wildlife, while developing emergency response networks that could provide immediate intervention when civilians faced natural predators. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the wildlife trauma psychologist who had been working with Mason since his alligator encounter, was amazed by his emotional development and environmental awareness, despite surviving one of the most terrifying experiences a child could face. Mason's recovery has exceeded every psychological prediction we made, she reported during a presentation to the Florida Association of Environmental Psychology. His transformation demonstrates the powerful impact that positive adult relationships and environmental education can have on childhood trauma recovery. The secret to Mason's remarkable healing wasn't just the therapy he had received. It was the Brotherhood's understanding that children who had faced prehistoric predators needed more than professional treatment to recover. They needed environmental education, adventure learning, practical skills, and the knowledge that their survival could help protect other children from similar dangers. Dr. Martinez's research had documented measurable improvements in Mason's cognitive development, environmental awareness, leadership skills, and emotional resilience that correlated directly with his involvement in wetland safety education and his integration into the Brotherhood's mission-focused family structure. Mason's case challenges conventional assumptions about childhood wildlife trauma recovery, Dr. Martinez explained to colleagues studying pediatric environmental psychology. When children have access to purposeful activities that use their survival experience to help others understand nature's dangers, their healing capacity far exceeds what trauma psychology typically predicts. Doc Patterson had become Mason's wilderness medicine instructor, using his Special Forces medical training to teach the boy advanced first aid skills, while also serving as his guide for understanding how medical knowledge could save lives in swamp emergency situations. Mason's not just learning first aid, he's learning to be a protector, Doc explained to environmental education professionals who observed their training sessions. He understands that his survival gives him responsibilities to help other people prepare for and safely coexist with Florida's dangerous wildlife. The wilderness medicine training that Mason received was adapted for his age and physical capabilities, but it included real skills that could make the difference between life and death for someone facing a medical emergency in remote wetland areas where professional help might be hours away. "Tell me, have you ever saved someone?" Mason asked Doc during one of their training sessions, eager to understand how he could use his knowledge to help others. Doc's answer became a teaching moment about service, environmental awareness, and the responsibility that came with survival experience. "I've helped many people during my military service and with the Brotherhood," he explained. "But the most important thing I've learned is that protecting people starts with understanding the environment we live in and staying prepared for the dangers that nature presents." If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? Gator Williams had applied his Marine Force recon training to developing Mason's wetland survival skills, teaching him advanced techniques for alligator awareness, water safety, emergency signaling, and environmental navigation that went far beyond typical youth outdoor education. Mason faced the ultimate Florida predator and survived because good adults were willing to risk their lives for him, Gator explained to environmental education conferences throughout the Southeast. Now he's learning skills that could help him survive other dangerous encounters and maybe help him save someone else who needs protection in alligator country. Gator's approach to Mason's education combined practical wetland skills with character development, that emphasized environmental responsibility, personal safety awareness, and the kind of courage that had motivated the Brotherhood to risk their lives for a child they didn't know. Mason's wetland skills had advanced to levels that impressed professional wildlife officers and park rangers. But more importantly, he had developed the kind of calm environmental awareness that could help him make good decisions around dangerous wildlife and provide leadership when other people were frightened or unprepared. Scout Rodriguez had channeled his Army Ranger training into developing Mason's tactical observation and problem-solving abilities, teaching him to analyze dangerous wildlife situations and develop response strategies that used environmental awareness effectively. Mason learned about predators and survival in the most dangerous way possible, Scout explained to youth development professionals studying their programs. Now, we're teaching him to observe wildlife behavior strategically and to understand that most dangerous encounters can be avoided when you stay alert and use proper environmental awareness. The tactical observation skills that Mason developed were applicable far beyond wildlife encounters. He was learning to approach academic challenges, social situations, and family problems using systematic observation and environmental thinking that would serve him throughout his life. Mason's teachers at Homestead Elementary School reported that he showed exceptional environmental awareness, advanced critical thinking abilities, and a mature understanding of safety that influenced his entire class positively. Mason has become a natural leader who helps other children understand environmental safety and wildlife awareness, observed his teacher, Mrs. Patricia Rodriguez, during parent conferences. He's learned to observe before acting, but he's also learned to act decisively when safety requires immediate response. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. Thunder Martinez had established a youth environmental emergency response program that taught children throughout Florida practical skills for surviving various types of wildlife encounters while building their confidence and environmental responsibility. Children like Mason face wildlife dangers that adults often create through poor environmental planning, inadequate supervision, or lack of understanding about living safely near dangerous species, Thunder explained during presentations to state wildlife agencies. Our program teaches children practical skills for surviving wildlife encounters while also educating adults about their responsibilities for creating safe environments in predator habitat. The youth emergency response training included age-appropriate instruction in wildlife behavior, emergency communication, basic survival skills, and coordination with wildlife management professionals who could provide expert assistance when needed. Mason had become the program's primary student instructor, helping other children learn wildlife safety skills while demonstrating that surviving scary encounters could make someone stronger rather than more fearful. His participation in training sessions throughout Florida had inspired hundreds of children to take environmental safety seriously. When Mason tells other kids about staying calm and using environmental awareness during wildlife encounters, they listen because he's actually survived something that would have killed most people, Thunder observed during program evaluations. He's living proof that children can be smart and brave when they understand the environment they live in. Phoenix Martinez had developed a specialized family wetland safety program that taught entire families how to live safely in alligator habitat while maintaining appropriate environmental awareness and emergency response capabilities. Mason's family learned wildlife safety the hard way when their child nearly died because of inadequate environmental awareness and property security, Phoenix explained to residential development organizations throughout South Florida. Our program helps families develop the knowledge and skills they need to live safely in Florida's unique ecosystem. The family safety program included instruction in alligator behavior, property security, emergency communication, and coordination with wildlife management agencies that could provide professional assistance when wildlife encounters exceeded family capabilities. Mason's family had become the program's demonstration family, showing other residents how environmental safety education could enhance rather than limit their quality of life in Florida's beautiful but dangerous ecosystem. Their example had been crucial for convincing other families to invest time in learning skills that could save lives. "Tell me, have you ever saved someone?" Mason asked during family safety presentations, encouraging other children to understand their role in keeping their families safe while living in alligator territory. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? Ranger Davis had expanded his wildlife enforcement background to develop a comprehensive residential safety monitoring program that identified and addressed wildlife hazards in populated areas before they could threaten residents. Mason's alligator encounter occurred near a retention pond that had been identified as high risk for reptile activity, but warning systems and resident education were inadequate to prevent the incident. Ranger explained to county development officials, "Our monitoring program helps residential areas maintain safety standards that protect families while respecting wildlife habitat." The residential monitoring program included regular wildlife assessments, habitat modification recommendations, resident education, and coordination with emergency response agencies to ensure that problems could be addressed before they created dangers for children and families. The program had identified and addressed dozens of potential wildlife hazards throughout Miami-Dade and Broward counties, preventing conditions that could have led to serious injuries or deaths among residential populations living near natural habitat. The annual Mason-Thompson Day celebration had become the largest environmental safety event in South Florida, bringing together thousands of families whose lives had been touched by Mason's story or the Brotherhood's wildlife safety programs. The event commemorated not just his rescue from the alligator, but the ongoing work that had grown from that terrifying encounter. 10 months ago, I almost died because my family and I didn't know how to be safe around alligators. Mason addressed the enormous crowd during the anniversary celebration, speaking with remarkable confidence for someone so young. Today, my Brotherhood family and I teach thousands of families how to live safely in Florida while being prepared to help each other when wildlife emergencies happen. The celebration included wildlife safety demonstrations, emergency response training, environmental education presentations, and testimonials from families who had used safety skills to prevent or survive dangerous wildlife encounters. 7-year-old Sofia Martinez shared her experience using Mason's safety training during a family camping trip. "When we saw an alligator near our campsite, I remembered what Mason taught us about staying calm and backing away slowly. My parents called the wildlife officers and we moved to a safe area until they relocated the gator." Sophia's successful wildlife encounter using techniques taught in Mason's safety programs embodied everything the young boy and the Brotherhood were working to achieve through their environmental education initiatives. 8-year-old Carlos Chen told his story about helping prevent a neighborhood child from approaching a retention pond where alligators had been spotted. "When I saw a little kid getting close to dangerous water, I used what Mason taught me about speaking up when other people might be in danger. I told his parents about the alligator signs, and they moved him away from the water." The community that had formed around Mason's rescue represented something unprecedented in Florida environmental safety education. A sustainable collaboration between military veterans, wildlife professionals, emergency response agencies, and families committed to living safely in one of America's most dangerous natural ecosystems. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. 2 years after his alligator encounter, Mason Thompson had been appointed as the youth spokesperson for the Florida Wildlife Safety Commission, where his programs and philosophy were being implemented throughout the state. The 6-year-old, who had once faced death from a prehistoric predator, was now influencing government policies that protected families throughout Florida's vast wetland systems. The commission appointment represented official recognition of Mason's unique expertise and the effectiveness of the veteran-led approach to wildlife safety education that had grown from his rescue. But for Mason personally, it represented an opportunity to ensure that other children would never face the terror he had survived. Mason's survival and leadership have demonstrated that children can not only recover from traumatic wildlife experiences, but can become powerful advocates for protecting other families, commented Dr. Robert Williams, the Commission's chair. His programs show how military veterans, wildlife professionals, and community members can work together to create safer residential environments in predator habitat. Mason's first recommendation to the Commission was the establishment of state funding for community-based wildlife safety programs that combined veteran volunteer services with professional environmental education and emergency response capabilities. His proposal was based on documented results from the Brotherhood's programs rather than theoretical approaches to wildlife management. The Commission's unanimous approval of Mason's recommendations led to the creation of the Florida Residential Wildlife Protection Initiative, a state-funded program that provided grants for veteran organizations to develop wildlife safety education in coordination with schools, wildlife agencies, and emergency services. The Brotherhood's wildlife safety model had been adopted by veteran organizations in 6 states, creating a network of volunteer emergency responders who understood that protecting communities required specialized attention to the unique dangers that families faced when living near dangerous wildlife populations. Mason's work with the Commission required him to participate in meetings and presentations that challenged many adults, but his natural leadership abilities and his first-hand experience with wildlife danger made him an effective advocate for policies that addressed families' real needs. I can help lawmakers understand what families really need to be safe around alligators because I've been in the worst danger possible and I know what it feels like to be helpless, Mason explained to Commission members during policy discussions. Adults make better decisions when they remember that children depend on them to know how to keep everyone safe around dangerous wildlife. Tell me, have you ever saved someone? Mason asked Commission members, challenging them to understand their responsibility for creating policies that could prevent wildlife tragedies. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? 3 years after 10 motorcycles had converged on the sound of a child's scream in alligator habitat, the ripple effects of Mason's rescue continued to spread throughout the Southeast and beyond. The Brotherhood's model of veteran-led wildlife safety education had been implemented in over 40 communities, creating a network of programs that had helped thousands of families develop coexistence skills while providing emergency response capabilities. The expansion had been carefully managed to ensure that safety standards and program effectiveness weren't compromised by rapid growth. New chapters were required to complete extensive training in wildlife behavior, environmental safety, and youth education, demonstrating commitment to both veteran welfare and family protection. The Brotherhood had grown to over 150 active members across 4 states, with chapters providing emergency response, safety education, family training, and youth development services that served thousands of families annually. Their success with wildlife safety programming had attracted support from major environmental organizations and state wildlife agencies. Mason's influence extended beyond direct service delivery to fundamental changes in how communities understood the relationship between residential development and wildlife safety. His programs demonstrated that effective environmental protection required coordination between veteran expertise, professional services, and community education. Mason taught us that every child saved from wildlife danger has the potential to save others. Steele reflected during his presentation at the International Wildlife Management Conference. The boy we rescued from an alligator has created programs that protect thousands of families from all kinds of wildlife dangers that education and preparation can prevent. The presentation brought together over 3,000 professionals from around the world who were studying innovative approaches to human-wildlife conflict and residential safety management. Mason's story and the Brotherhood's programs had influenced safety policies in 8 countries. Mason, now 9 years old and serving as the Brotherhood's Director of Youth Environmental Education, had been chosen to address the international conference. His transformation from terrified victim to confident environmental advocate represented the kind of growth that effective support and purposeful environmental education could inspire. 3 years ago, I almost died because my family didn't understand how dangerous alligators could be, Mason told the international audience with remarkable composure. Today, my Brotherhood family and I work every day to help families learn how to live safely with Florida's amazing but dangerous wildlife while being prepared to help each other when scary things happen. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. 5 years after his rescue from the 14-foot alligator, Mason Thompson was serving as a youth consultant for the National Wildlife Safety Administration, while maintaining his role as a student leader in the Brotherhood's expanded education programs. The boy, who had once faced death from a prehistoric predator, was now helping develop policies that protected families throughout America's wildlife habitat areas. The lesson I learned that day wasn't just that good people exist when you need help, Mason told audiences at the National Wildlife Safety Conference, speaking with environmental wisdom that exceeded his age. The lesson was that everyone has the responsibility to learn how to live safely with wildlife, and that the scariest experiences can teach us how to help other people avoid the same dangers. Mason's presentation included statistical analysis of 5 years of Brotherhood programs, over 15,000 families trained in wildlife safety, 12,000 children educated in environmental awareness, 8,000 adults certified in wildlife first aid, and measurable improvements in residential safety throughout the Southeast. But Mason's presentation focused more on individual stories than statistics. Specific examples of families who had used environmental education to avoid wildlife conflicts, children who had helped during wildlife emergencies, and communities that had developed comprehensive safety networks that prevented tragedies. These aren't just success stories, Mason explained to the national audience with remarkable environmental eloquence. These are proof that families can live safely with dangerous wildlife when they understand their environment properly, and that communities can prevent tragedies when everyone understands their responsibility to help keep each other safe in wildlife habitat. The national attention had led to requests for technical assistance from wildlife management agencies throughout the world, as countries with large wildlife populations wanted to understand how veteran organizations could enhance human-wildlife coexistence programs. 10 years after 10 bikers had heard a child scream in alligator country, Mason Thompson continued to serve as a wildlife safety advocate while pursuing his education and maintaining his role as an inspiration for the Brotherhood's expanded environmental mission. The organization had trained wildlife safety teams in over 15 states and had contributed to preventing hundreds of serious wildlife conflicts and residential emergencies. The location where Mason had faced the alligator had been converted into the Mason Thompson Wildlife Safety Education Center, a facility that provided training for families, wildlife professionals, and emergency responders, while serving as a memorial to the courage that ordinary people could show when children needed protection from natural predators. Tell me, have you ever saved someone, Mason's story asked everyone who heard it, challenging them to understand that environmental heroism wasn't just for people with special training, but for anyone willing to learn wildlife safety skills and to act decisively when someone needed help. The alligator that had stalked Mason had been successfully relocated to remote Everglades habitat where human contact was minimal, living out its life in appropriate wetland environment, while Mason's experience led to improved residential development policies that protected both families and wildlife. The 10 bikers who had stopped everything to save one child from an alligator had created a legacy that continued to protect families throughout America's wildlife areas. Mason's story demonstrated that heroes could appear anywhere, that environmental wisdom could be learned and taught, and that the most terrifying wildlife encounters could become the foundation for helping countless other people live safely with dangerous species. Mason's legacy would continue for generations, proving that sometimes the smallest victims can inspire the largest environmental safety movements, and that when good people commit to protecting families in wildlife habitat, ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things that save innocent lives in America's most challenging natural environments.